Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We normally wait a little while to unveil the special guest, but our special guest tonight is very familiar to you already, I'm sure, if you're a regular viewer of the show, or if you're familiar with the Scottish Family Potty. So welcome to Philip. It's great to have you with us again.
It's nice to be back. It's been a while.
For those of you not aware, Philip's up in Durness in the far north of Scotland. And we've got lots of things to talk about this evening. I've got a few things on the list. Phil's got a few things as well. And as ever, we'll try to get through quite a few of the comments as well. So do fire comments in. We'll try and pick up on those, and you can direct the conversation a little bit as well. Before we launch into the first one, quick reminder about the Scottish Family Potty Conference coming up on the 12th of November in Dunfermline. Go to our social media. You can see links to buy tickets. It's a bargain, unchanged from last year, despite the rate of inflation. £25, including lunch and refreshments. Then there's a meal in the evening as well. There's an additional charge for that if you want to join us for the meal.
It's 100. It's absolutely worth it.
Absolutely.
I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, it'll be great. Phil is speaking. I'll be speaking. We've got a great lineup of speakers. Our conference last year, I think the lineup of speakers was brilliant, but as the party grows, we've got more and more people who are capable to give a really good talk on a topic. So there's quite a lot of new faces in the conference this year. And we'll be introducing quite a few of our new branch chairmen. There'll be all sorts of literature and campaigning materials available. And so be with some really interesting tales to tell as well. I'm particularly looking forward to listening to Paul Gilfillan. Again, those of you who are at our inaugural Scottish Family Party Conference, remember him. He got rave reviews. He's a sociologist from Queen Margaret University, and he's got a tale to tell, let's put it that way, in his career. And also he spent some time in Hungary recently. I think it was 6 months. It might have been longer. So his experience studying in a very, very different context, let's put it that way. So it's going to be fascinating to listen to him. Right, nice to see some comments starting to come in. Other events coming up just while I'm at that. Thursday this week, we have a meeting in Dundee. 7 o'clock. It would have been in the Queen's Hotel, our usual venue, but apparently the Queen's Hotel is now full of refugees. So we're moving to the counting house, Wetherspoon's counting house. Don phoned me today and we just sorted that out at the last minute. So Dundee, the meeting is in the counting house. And also on Thursday night, there's a meeting in Newton Stewart, 7:30 in the Crown Hotel. Newton Stewart down in Dumfries and Galloway. So if you're in that area, so do make the efforts to get along. With our new branch chairman, the branch areas are now quite a bit smaller. So Charles McEwen, who used to be in charge of south of Scotland, which was enormous, is now just Dumfries and Galloway, because we've got lots of other branch chairmen who've been appointed as well. So if you're anywhere near Newton Stewart, do go along there. I went to a meeting there a couple of years ago at a lovely part of the world. But right now, Phil, I'm going to read this story to you. It's quite traumatic. Trigger warning. This is quite a horrific story. This is from STV News. Woman suffered panic attack when confronted by anti-abortion protesters. Julia was forced to walk past the group holding banners outside Chalmers Street Sexual Health Clinic in Edinburgh. And there's a picture there that shows three ladies in coats holding up signs. I mean, the signs, it's appalling. I wouldn't normally read these signs, but I think you need to realize just how aggressive and appalling they are. I mean, the first sign, it says, "We can help." I mean, shocking, isn't it?
Yeah.
The other one says,
God.
Yeah. And they're allowed to do this on the streets. In 2022, women are allowed to stand there with a sign saying, "We can help." I mean, how this is still tolerated, I don't know. And another woman's holding a sign up saying, "Pray to end abortion." Anyway, so Julia was forced to walk past the group holding banners outside Chalmers Street Sexual Health Clinic in Edinburgh. She's told how she felt shaken after being confronted by anti-abortion protesters and suffered a panic attack outside a sexual health clinic in Edinburgh, confronted by them.
So do I get that right? So these three women attacked this woman with their banners and were probably hitting her over the head with the banners. Is that what happened?
I mean, confronted, it sounds like they're using the banners as shields, doesn't it? So they went right up and blocked her way like some sort of Roman legion and pushed her backwards with them, confronting her. I mean, it's fantasy world. Fantasy world. This is from the STV website.
And so this lady was forced to walk past them, and I assume she was forced to look at them and read the banners. Is that correct? Somebody turned her head and forcibly opened her eyes so that she had to look at them.
Yeah. So it then said, protesters from the Texas-based, they love to get in Texas-based, as though everything from Texas must be bad. Texas-based 40 Days for Life campaign, which seeks to pray to end abortion, have been staging demonstrations outside health facilities in Scotland since September. They always say Texas-based. They never say endorsed by the Pope, because 40 Days for Life is endorsed by the Pope. If you look at their website, there's a message of support from the Pope. They never seem to get around to mentioning that in the report. Let's carry on with the grisly details of this this attack that took place in the street. A patient at Chalmers Street Sexual Health Clinic in Edinburgh told STV News how being confronted by the protesters felt like being bullied in school again when she was forced to walk past them to attend an appointment on the 4th of October. Like being bullied in school. Is that what bullies did when you were at school? Just stand quietly and leave you alone, but hold placards. Is that what bullies did when you were at school?
Well, luckily I can say I only had one incident of bullying, and it wasn't that bad, to be honest. So it sounds very much like the bullies that I experienced, because I didn't experience any.
Right. Julia, who did not wish to use her full name, she was probably afraid that these people would target her and track her down to her house. She accused the demonstrators of nasty gaslighting and bullying. Yeah, really nasty. Yeah. The 43-year-old uses a mobility aid to walk and carries a blue badge, yet she says she was unable to park in disabled bays due to the protesters using the areas as a drop-off.
That sounds like an absolute fabrication, correct?
Pack of lies. Absolute pack of lies. But anyway, if you're on the right side, if you want to go to STV and just spin complete fantasy to them, they'll just publish it on their website. They'll report it as news. No effort to check it. But is it not obvious to anyone with an ounce of common sense that with an issue like this, people are motivated to say how they've been traumatized and upset and how they felt harassed, this, that, and the other. They're motivated to say that. And so people will say it. Is it okay if I carry on, Phil? You're not finding this too distressing?
Yeah. Well, I had a Valium before we started it, so I'm doing okay.
Well done. Right, Julia instead parked on a nearby street to avoid the group, but became distressed and was triggered with an asthma attack, which developed into a panic attack. So caused by, obviously, these people confronting her. Just to clarify, the people at the vigil, their policy is they never speak to anybody. That they pray quietly. They never speak to anyone unless someone speaks to them. And if someone speaks to them, they say, okay, if you'd like to have a chat, we can just go around the corner and have a chat. She told STV News, I wasn't there for an abortion. It was a routine appointment, and I don't think the majority of people here are getting abortions. People attend for a range of reasons. They shouldn't have to encounter this. As I walked past, they lowered their signs and stared me down. Fantasy. It's one of the scariest things that's happened to me in a long, long time. I mean, let's imagine it was true that you walk past and these people look at you as you walk past. I mean, I don't find that particularly scary, but it's just
okay. So let's pause here. It really just highlights how sensitive and how weak we as a society are at the moment. And unfortunately, articles like that just highlight that we can't take anything seriously anymore. But I actually believe this woman. I do believe this woman that she had a panic attack because people are manipulated into such a fragile emotional state nowadays. And in some ways, it also affects me. I mean, Richard, when I visited you recently in Edinburgh, like being in the city, seeing all the rainbow flags, it actually made me really upset. And come on, it's just rainbow flags. I could just ignore them, but I don't want to ignore them anymore. So I get triggered by everything nowadays. And so in some ways, I understand that this woman was triggered because everything is hyper political nowadays, and people just can't deal with opposing opinions anymore.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, I think it's getting worse and worse and worse.
yeah. And that's the message through school, is that life is just an emotional battlefield.
Yeah.
And you should expect to be absolutely floored and incapacitated by the ordinary events of the school week. You should expect to need like a counseling session at the end of it, because you're so delicate. If something happens that's not quite what you wanted, then dear me, you can expect to absolutely fall to bits and need all sorts of external support from it. So yeah, it is a feature. Anyway, just to conclude, the NHS commented about this. We're disappointed to hear of the planned anti-abortion demonstrations near the premises. Well, of course they are, because they're the people conducting the abortions. So they're hardly going to say, yeah, we're really delighted that people are protesting what we're doing in here. We really welcome that. Thanks for coming. So obviously, and it says which could have the effect of intimidating our staff and people that need support from our services. Could have the effect. But there's no reason why they would, but sort of could in theory. We'd like to reassure our patients that we remain resolute in providing a high standard of safe and legal care, and we'll do all we can to minimize disruption. And anyway, that's the media fantasy. I'll just tell you a couple of things from the actual reality.
Yep.
Today, a man came and so obviously aggressively snatched the placard from someone's hand, and then he snatched another placard. They just happened to be sitting down. One of the ladies there today is blind, and my wife was just helping her. So my wife's placard was just on the ground for a moment. So this man took it, sort of ran away with it, ripped it up, thrown it in the bin. It's routine to get obscene gestures. That's just, like once every 5 or 10 minutes, you'll get that. I mean, the school children getting towards physical assault last week, being very aggressive, intimidating and provocative. And you got a lot of adults as well who just mouth off in the most aggressive and appalling ways.
Can I just
say, but among that as well, you got lots of people giving a thumbs up and expressing support. So.
Is a lot of this interaction being filmed?
Well, that's an interesting question, because some people who do this sort of thing, they use a body cam so that they've got the evidence when people are accused of all sorts of nonsense. I mean, last year, the accusation was made that some supporters of the vigil had driven a car into someone, which was absolute fantasy, but it ended up in the Scotsman and it circulated. So some people have a camera. The problem with that is people then accuse you of filming people going in.
Well, the thing is, I think you should definitely film it just for the safety of the people standing there, because potentially attacks towards them. I mean, property damage, like the placards being ripped up, that's already property damage. And I think stuff like that needs to be filmed just for safety reasons, to be honest.
Yeah. I've been down a couple of times just to film, particularly when the school children were coming out, because the people there were quite worried about that. So I went down ready to film. I don't know if that deterred them from their usual actions. I'm not sure. But these things, what's it caused by? I mean, your local SNP MSP, Emma Roddick. Have you come across her?
No, I have not.
Right. Yeah. Well, you'll come across her soon enough, I'm sure. I mean, there's no other word for it. Her comment, she's just a downright liar about the vigil. She said that they violently prevent women from accessing healthcare. Violently prevent women from accessing healthcare. So I'll say it again, Emma Roddick, you're a liar. You are a liar.
Oh, yeah. I just Googled her. Yeah, I do know her face. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my wife emailed her about that and said, that's not true. And she replied back saying, I'm not backing down. It's a matter of principle. So telling lies is a matter of principle.
Unfortunately, these people really get away with everything,
Mhm.
because obviously the media covers up their lies and actually doubles down for them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I find this a fascinating insight into the nature of the media, because it's so one-sided and distorted. It's beyond belief, and so uniform across like all of the mainstream media. It just, I always think it's interesting. If it's an issue that you know more about than the people reporting it, then you can actually
Yeah,
judge how accurate the reporting is. On
yeah.
most issues, you don't know as much about it as the people reporting it. But on the occasions when you do know more, you think, wow,
That's
wow.
why when I see too much uniformity in reporting, I usually do my own research, because I
Uh-huh.
immediately start to question things, as you know.
Hmm.
Sometimes
Yeah.
maybe too much. But the problem is, if I can't verify it, the media has gotten me to a point where I'm like, if I can't verify it, I will not believe you. I will say this is what the media reports, but I don't know if it's true.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is quite remarkable. Anyway, let's move on from
Sure.
that issue. I've got another couple of things. Now, I came across something interesting today. I was looking up a law for another reason, and I happened to come across the actual Act of Parliament. I think it was from 1981, that deals with children's age of majority, age of consent, not for sex, just authority to make decisions for themselves. Very interesting. So, what do you think of this, Phil? We'll get some questions in a minute.
Mhm.
If you're 16 years of age, you should have legal capacity to consent on his own behalf to any under 16 years of age, shall have legal capacity to consent on his own behalf to any surgical, medical, or dental procedure or treatment, as long as the qualified medical practitioner attending him thinks he is capable of understanding the nature and possible consequences of the procedure. So basically, that applies to children of any age.
That is terrifying.
Yeah, I used to think it was sort of 12, but the law is, if the doctor decides this 5-year-old understands and can make their own decision, then as parents, can you just wait next door, please? I'm having this conversation with a
So
child
that
of
is
any
a
age.
proposed so that is a proposed law.
No, this has been the law since 1991 in Scotland. It's a Scottish law. So this precedes the Scottish Parliament.
That is terrifying.
It is. I mean, there should be a massive, massive controversy in Scottish policy. But this is you say before the Parliament even existed. So the rot was setting in Scotland before the Scottish Parliament came along. I mean, it is. It's frightening.
Who
Whoever would think that would be a sensible law.
do you know which party actually came up with this bill?
Well, there was 1991, so that would have been Labour. Am I getting that right? Labour government? No, 1991. No, what we're talking about? No, Conservative. Yeah, that'd be Conservative government until 97, wasn't it? Yeah.
Who would even come up with something like that? That's ridiculous.
It's that children's rights activists. It's the sort of the blob, the social work, the academics, the education establishment. They all think along those lines. More and more authority to children. Treat children like adults. This is what they come up with.
The only way I can see this being proposed and actually going through, or how it went through, was, for example, with let's say the parents are Jehovah's Witnesses, and because of their faith, they and their children are not allowed to get blood transfusions, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So if and the parents can make decisions on behalf of the children, then obviously the children will be pushed by medical stuff to reject the faith of the
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah. I think in extreme cases, you could see that there might need to be an intervention. But in the usual run of things, this would include like abortions, transgender treatments. The policy
Yeah.
is if they think the child can understand, then parents are left out of it.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. It might have been introduced also because of abortions.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite possible.
Yeah, yeah. But it just shows that thinking has been there since 1991, completely unchallenged. Completely unchallenged. Now, if this was put forward in the Scottish Parliament today, they'd probably argue about it. You get Conservatives would be saying something about, oh, they turn it to the Constitution one way or another. So the SNP would be saying, oh, well, we could do this much better if we were independent. The Conservatives would be saying, oh, no. And it just, everything turns back to the Constitution. And what should be a huge issue here, a huge undermining of parental rights and parental authority, and also handing over authority over children, basically to professionals, to government agents. But medical professionals, are they neutral in what they're proposing? Often not. They've got their own ideology. They've got their own philosophy that they're bringing to it.
To be honest, I wonder how well known this law is, and I wonder if people were more aware of it, if more young people would take advantage of it. But on the other hand, obviously, the abortion issue is already completely out of the hands of the parents. And yeah, transgender obviously is also partially out of the hands of the parents.
Yeah. I think children are taught that they've got this right.
Right.
Basically, children are made aware of it. And the medical professionals often are on the front foot to inform children about that. You might have heard me tell this story before. When I was a housemaster in the boarding school, I had a delivery of these little booklets that explained to this was 12 and 13-year-old boys. It explained to them their right to medical confidentiality. It explained how they could get like things posted to their friend instead of coming to their house, so they could keep secrets from my mum and dad. And I was told I had to give these out to the boys. So I went to do a house meeting. I threw them all in the bin. And I said, if any of you are interested in medical confidentiality, go and pull one of those out of the bin. It's all yours. Of course, it was none of the boys who were remotely interested in it. They didn't even know what it was about. And that was that was fine. So, confession time. But anyway, this bill, that's the start of it. But it then goes on to say, now, unfortunately, my printer's cut the edge off the page, but I can piece it together, I think. So it says this includes the storage of gametes in accordance with the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act, 1990. So I assume that's like the storage of sperm and eggs, freezing of sperm and eggs. So for any age child, if the medical professional deems that they understand, they can go ahead and do that. And
without the knowledge of the parents.
Correct. Yeah. So if you think about that with some sort of transgender procedures.
Insane.
Yeah. And it says people under the age of 16 shall have legal capacity to consent to the use of the person's human cells in accordance with Schedule 3 of the Embryology Act 1990 for the purposes of a project of research where the person is capable of understanding the nature of the can't quite read that bit, of the human cells. So again, children can consent to have their cells used in sort of embryological research. I mean, how many adults can get their head around that, about what's going on with it?
Yeah.
But they're saying children of any age.
So in the end, it just shows that the grooming of children has been going on for such a long time. We are just now seeing such a perverted and insane version of grooming of children that everybody can see it, or most people can see it. But it's been going on for a very long time.
Yeah, especially in Scotland. I don't know why. Maybe this ideology has just got a stronger grip in Scotland one way or another, but it seems stronger in Scotland. Let's have a look at a few questions. Right, yes, somehow. Right.
Do you have that? Just a question. Do you have the feeling that in some ways Scottish people care less? Because
Um,
I don't have the feeling that they have strong convictions in this area, but it seems like are they more libertarian minded, that they just say, oh, I don't care what other people do with their lives?
I think to a large extent is people haven't realized what was happening, because for most people that they've got a diet of sort of a little bit of mainstream media news and current affairs, whatever. They've just been unaware of it, and maybe the only time that it's presented to them is in a professional context, where the trainer comes in and says, "No, it's really great because some children have abusive parents, but don't you worry, we've got this special system where we let the parents make the decisions for themselves." And most people will sit there thinking, "Oh yeah, I can sort of see the point," but it needs someone. It often needs someone to help them
Yeah,
to be aware of the issues, to say, hang on a minute, have we not thought about the other side of this? Have we thought about the
yeah.
implications of this? Anyway, John, right. Victoria Gillick challenged the government on the under-16s making decisions regarding the pill, abortions, etc. She was ridiculed by the media, but made her stance against parental exclusion. No one supports her. Yeah, I think it's not a popular cause as far as the mainstream political parties are concerned. Pushed by the United Nations, yes, it is. It is, because this is all part of the children's rights agenda.
Yeah.
So that is very much an apt comment.
Richard, do you see anything positive about the United Nations, or because at this point um I see them just as an evil construct to enforce laws that are in the end against the population and against countries?
I think traditionally, I think the concept is a good one, to have some sort of talking shop for nations, and basically to try and encourage or pressurize nations where things are not so good to improve in various important areas. So as it was originally conceived, I think it was very good, and again to provide like emergency relief, famine relief. So good motive. And I think a lot of what it does now as well is still positive, but like everything, it's so politicized that it seems that everything it does has got a certain philosophical agenda behind it. So I think its net impact now, I think, would be negative. It's certainly its impact on a country like Scotland is negative.
I think when you said, well, they can put pressure on countries where things are not going that great. The problem is who decides what is great. According to the UN, obviously, things that are going on in Hungary are not great because they're conservative, or Poland. As soon as something is socially conservative, it's not great. So we have this massive, powerful organization that puts pressure on the destruction of traditional values. And I have, when I was in Botswana with Masedi, I noticed that the language in Botswana about equality, diversity, that I heard in the radio is exactly the same language that I hear here in Scotland and in Europe. And this is all being pushed by the UN. And in some ways, I found it quite interesting, because it's actually in some ways a new form of not imperialism, but of what's the term?
It's like a new form of imperialism, isn't it? It's a way of imposing your will, imposing a will on countries, undemocratically. I mean, that's a really important thing about it as well. This is undemocratic. I mean, for example,
the thing is, I'm not even sure if it's undemocratic, because they are so good brainwashing people that people are on board with it, because they always present it under the disguise of compassion, of rights, and obviously they are actually taking rights away, but that's not being presented. And since the media is on board with them, there's nobody who can call them out.
They're not criticized in the media. So when they look at UK politics, they think it's their job to hold it well. They're supposed to hold them to account, to give them a hard time. But then when it comes to the United Nations, it's more a case of, can you please give us the information for us to share with the population so we can educate them? They don't treat them as a political body that needs to be held to account. And the classic illustration of the UN and its attitude was they produced a report on children's rights in the Vatican, and they told the Vatican that they needed to introduce abortion. Now, I haven't seen the reply. I hope the Vatican told them in no uncertain terms what they could do with that request. But that's the way they see themselves, that they're above everything else. They're the highest level. All the other philosophies and political parties, religions,
because
cultures, that's below them.
Well, because they are. So the UN, they constructed something called the Istanbul Convention. And the Istanbul Convention is a convention to address violence against women and girls. Of course, it does a lot of other things. It pushes gender ideology into schools and so on and so forth. And in the Istanbul Convention, they say with no uncertain terms that one of the goals of the convention is to get rid of gender norms and everything that is based on gender norms. For example, which would include marriage, which would also include every religious belief. And it's very clear, the way it's phrased, it's very clear that they're directly attacking religions and cultural norms that have a gendered nature.
Yeah. I mean, in the olden days, the United Nations would say people haven't got enough to eat in this part of the world, that there's not enough doctors. But it says they're like, no one cares about that anymore. No one cares. It's, how are they doing with ticking the boxes for gender equality? Do we need more like feminist teaching in the schools? They're focused on these things rather than genuine needs.
The tragic thing is that, for example, I'm now very reluctant to support, let's say, support for education in countries in Africa, for example, because I don't want our education to take over Africa. I'm like, well, if they would support African teachers teaching children in Africa with what they see fit, that would be fine. But unfortunately, they have to teach exactly the same things that are being taught here to indoctrinate the next generation of African children. And I really don't want that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. But that's the same in Scotland with regard to independent schools. I mean, I worked in an independent school that had exam results that were fantastic, really, really good. But the inspectors would come in and they'd say, oh, you're not doing it right. You should be doing it this way. And people in the school would reply by saying, okay, look at our results. This is not just because we've got like a higher quality of people, that there's ways of measuring the value added rather. So look what we're doing here. It's really working well. And they would point blank say, we're not interested. We're not interested in the results. We're here to tell you to do it our way, because our way must be the best.
There is an interesting book called The War Against Boys. I think it's written by Janice Fiamingo, but I could be wrong. And it takes a close look on educational systems in America, people that created schools that work particularly well for boys, but not exclusively. And for example, one example, there was a deprived area in New York, which was called Aviation High, and the kids could work on airplanes if the grades were good, and they were doing incredibly well, like really, really well. But it was predominantly boys that were doing well in this school, or that were going to the school, and so the schools were shut down. And that was consistent every time a school tried to help boys, and that's what the whole book is about. That's why it's called The War Against Boys. Every time a school was working really well for boys, the government tried to shut it down.
Yeah. So we started that passage from this ridiculous law that I actually read the text of today. Right, before we move on to something else, we'll look at some comments too. I've mentioned the meetings on Thursday this week, Dundee and Newton Stewart. On Thursday next week, we're having a pro-life rally at the Scottish Parliament at 1 p.m. For about an hour. Then after about an hour, the Scottish Trans Alliance begin their protest, their rally, which they're having outside the Parliament to coincide with the debate on the Gender Recognition Act. So we're having an hour pro-life and then an hour interacting with, adding some flavour to the trans one. We went before with the big placards, a man can't become a woman, etc. So we're going to go along with those. So do please join us at 1 p.m. Thursday next week in front of the Scottish Parliament. We'll have our pro-life flags that we've got. I've just ordered a few placards just before this live stream as well. So it'd be great if you could come along. Right. Right. I don't see any questions actually there to pick up on.
I would like to read out one by John. And it says, don't forget they are harvesting eggs from aborted babies for experimentation. Yeah, unfortunately, that is true. And a fun fact, make of that what you will, but the European country with the highest level of harvested stem cells, for example, was or is, drumroll, Ukraine.
Okay.
Again. So the problem is that in some countries they're with very little control. There are a lot of medical procedures going on that take advantage of the most vulnerable, including abortions and then taking stem cells and so on.
Yeah, there's a huge surrogacy industry in Ukraine as well.
Yeah.
A family party policy is to ban surrogacy completely.
Absolutely.
In Britain, at the moment, commercial surrogacy is illegal in Britain, but we'd like to be illegal completely, as it is in many other European countries.
The thing is, I would say there's almost no such thing as non-commercial surrogacy. Somehow a person always feels pressured into doing it. There are almost no cases where that is not where that's not the case.
Yeah. Right. Let's head to Westminster for a little while and talk about goings on in the UK government. What's your take on events? Are you in despair or what? Is this business as usual?
I really am, yes, because I'm worried that the UK will go down the same path as Germany. So after Germany lost Angela Merkel, and let's be honest, Angela Merkel did awful stuff in Germany, but at least she held the country somewhat together and slowly leading it down a path of destruction. People voted in a left-leaning government, different parties, and it's just in absolute free fall. And it's not that the people voted for the left-leaning parties, they voted against the Conservative Party, I would say, because they were disillusioned. And I'm terrified that the same is going to happen in the UK. And don't get me wrong, what the Tories are doing is incompetence on such a high level and spinelessness on such a high level that who can vote for them? But there is no alternative, and I dread to see a future where Labour and the SNP are potentially the two strongest parties.
Yeah. Well, the Labour and the Conservatives, how much different is it when we have a Conservative government compared to a Labour government? Not much. In terms of the social issues, Labour are a bit worse than the Conservatives. The Conservatives head in the wrong direction at 50 miles an hour. Labour head in the wrong direction at 70 miles an hour.
I agree.
But neither of them ever turn back and say, hang on, the right direction is over this way. So, I mean, in terms of running the economy, I mean, is any of the Conservatives' reputation for being the party of, restraint and prudence and whatever, is any of that reputation left, Iris?
The problem is, how can you introduce tax cuts and similar things, if all the media is hell-bent on destroying you, you cannot communicate. And don't get me wrong, the Conservative Party did an awful job communicating what they were doing. They didn't communicate it at all. But even with great communication, the media would not even give them a chance to communicate what they were trying to do. So I think they can't. They just can't make any changes. You would have to have a ridiculously big ego to say, you know what? I don't care. This is the right thing to do. You will thank me in a year.
But the election's 2 years away. You got a big majority.
They could have done it. They could have done it.
Surely you just say, right, this is what we think's best, so we're sticking with it. And okay, if it does all actually go wrong, not like in 2 days, a bit of market instability, whatever. If after months it's really not working, then you might say, okay, right, this is not working. But how economic policies? How long do you need to leave them before you actually see the results of them? I mean, these are not short-term things. This is something you've got to stick to. But to propose something and then back down almost immediately. As I say, a large part of the reason for the back down was just the media ferocity. But that seems to be what determines the government actions. It's routine now. They'll say they're going to do something. There's a backlash. So they'll say, all right, we won't do it after all. It's just
absolutely.
routine.
I completely agree. But unfortunately, I saw these qualities in Liz Truss before. I've been watching her for quite a while. And for me, Liz Truss was always a push around. She sometimes says the right things because one of her employees, I assume, put the right things in front of her. And she's like, oh, that sounds great. And then she says something, but she's not behind it. And I don't think that she truly understands it. The problem is, if you don't fully understand what you're doing, then it's hard for you to defend it. And yeah, I don't dislike her. I'm sure she's a nice enough person in her private life, but to lead a country, you need a spine, and she doesn't. She just doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, that's I agree with that absolutely. The Chancellor,
100%.
Yes, job. I suppose that sort of goes with the territory. That's the way governments work. That you expect that might happen to you, and it might be unfair. But yes, it is absolutely.
I think seeing him being kicked out is so counter-conservative. One of conservative values is loyalty. And you don't throw people under the bus. You explain things. You stand up for people. I cannot respect leaders that throw other people under the bus. Absolutely. There's just no way.
Yeah. I mean, we're always saying, obviously, we're saying support this party. Sometimes people say to us, you're not worried that you might split the vote so the Conservatives don't get in. No, not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. If we thought the Conservatives getting in was a great outcome, then we'd all be in the Conservative Party. So we think the other parties are at a state where we're not interested in choosing between them. We need something different and something new. Right.
I do think that in Scotland, I do think that in Scotland there are really, apart from us, no other alternatives. In England, in the UK, it's slightly different. I would say they have too many alternatives, and it would be good if some of these parties would actually come together and form one alliance party, like the true Conservatives, that where a little bit like the AfD in Germany, where disappointed Conservative voters could actually move to. Here in Scotland, obviously, that's us, but not in other parts of the UK.
They just haven't got the electoral system to do it, though. It's so discouraging and demoralizing to bang away at it under first past the post. Nigel Farage, I think he's making noises as if he's thinking about a comeback. He's maybe thinking the Conservatives are in such a state. Maybe it's one of those points where I could, ride over the horizon again and become leader of the Reform Party and see what happens. It made me think about it. But if that does happen, my prediction will be by the time it comes to a general election again, there'll be great excitement. They'll feel like they've got momentum, but then obviously no one will get elected, and then it will just start fading away again. I would imagine.
There is another possibility. Look at what happened in America with the Conservative Party. They were taken over by Trump because the Conservative Party was weak, and then he just came in with his whole "Make America Great Again," and now half of the party, I would say more than half of the party, are replaced by populists. And something like that could theoretically happen to the Conservative Party if the party lies on the ground and has absolutely no support. Theoretically speaking, a lot of populists could populate the Conservative Party and take it away from spineless non-conservatives. But that's just a dream, and it would take somebody like Nigel Farage to actually go into the Conservative Party and take over.
But then what happens when you go to something like the Conservative Party? It's like the Church of England, it's like the Church of Scotland, it's like a lot of institutions. When you've got a culture that's so compromised and timid, then to get anywhere in it, to get into it, you have to take on those values. So the prospect of getting someone who's going to turn it around and really stand up for something at the top is very, very remote. Now there's I
agree.
John, Alba Party conference was on STV News last week. Will we have them at our conference at the 12th? Laugh. Yeah, of course, total joke. Even though at the elections this year, I think we had 84 candidates. They had, was it 110 maybe? So comparable numbers of candidates. We got 1.35%. They got, I think, 1.7. So it's a pretty narrow gap. So if Alba got, a 2-minute report, we should be getting a 1.5-minute report on the news. But obviously no chance at all, because the media are allergic to the family party. We're talking about the conference and inviting media to it. We'll see. It's probably worth sending invitations. Someone might come along to do a hit piece, which we'd rather have that than nothing. Or they might come along, to like report it as a curiosity event. Look what these really weird people are doing, rather than, this is part of our political reporting. But we'll see. We shall see.
Richard, I know it's a bit short notice, but I could try to invite Kelvin Robinson to our party conference. I'm in contact with him. It's not strong contact, but I am in contact with him. So if you would like me to invite him, maybe you write a formal invitation, and I can forward that over to him.
Our schedule is pretty well set. We could talk about that after. It would be good to invite him, but the prospect of someone like that coming are probably very, very low, because they tend to want to avoid anything party political.
Or
do they? I don't know.
Theoretically, I would agree, but he is such an outspoken conservative Christian, and he doesn't seem to have an issue talking about politics and associating and disassociating, for example, with the Conservative Party. And he was at the Conservative Party conference a couple of weeks ago. So why would he not come to our party and maybe talk about Christians in politics, for example?
I would certainly get him on live stream, if not the conference. That would be great. Because as I was saying last week, I don't know if you heard me, Phil. I was talking about GB News and the way it's quite a challenge for us. Because in Scotland, a lot of our supporters and potential supporters watch GB News, and the Scottish Family Party is just not part of it. So they watch that and they go, oh, they're the real big players. It's the Reform Party. I mean, they're on endlessly. So they're watching these people, and it gives the impression they're the real party. I mean, in Scotland, Reform don't exist. We've got 3 times as many votes as them. But in Scotland, people sit watching GB News, getting the impression, Reform, they're the real party that's professional and going places. Family Party, they're not on telly. They're not a proper party.
Well, but by inviting Kelvin, maybe he would even just say, "Oh, let's do a little report about the party conference then for GB News."
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, we need to invite journalists.
I have to say that I'm quite shocked how many, well, on GB News, and I do like GB News, but a lot of commentators there, they are classical liberals. There are very, very few conservatives amongst the commentators, and you can feel it. I think you can feel it, that yes, they are a little bit populist and they are against the wokeness, but in the end they're still liberal.
Yeah.
My
conference speech 2 years ago was on the topic anti-woke is not enough, and I think that's the feeling that you get it in that context. That's for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's what I'm going to talk about as well at the conference.
I was just about to say that brings us on to something we were going to just mention tonight, because I would say that a sort of cultural conservative, someone, a lot of the people on GB News, for example, they would talk about the transgender thing, and they would say, this is a bit crazy, but it's a bit along the lines of, whoa, this is really new. This seems a bit mad to me. I'm not comfortable with this. It seems a bit strange. So, whoa, what's going on here? It's that sort of response. Whereas I would say, as a social conservative, whatever, then I've got a different sort of approach to it. I come to it from a different perspective. So tell us what you're going to say about different perspectives on this issue.
So for the uninitiated, there is a term called TERFs, which is short for trans-exclusionary radical feminists. J.K. Rowling, for example, is labeled a TERF because she is gender critical. And the TERFs, many of the feminists that see women's rights attacked by the trans ideology, they are moving over to the conservative side because the left side is completely on board with the transgender ideology. And so they are now knocking on the door of conservatives and find support there, or try to find support there. And unfortunately, I have to say, they find a lot of support there because the conservatives, they are chivalrous, so they care about women's rights, and they just let the feminists in because obviously, just like you and I, we agree that female spaces should be female spaces and male spaces should be male spaces. The problem is that feminists are deeply against the family. They are deeply against our traditional social structures. They are against marriage. They are pro-abortion. And the only issue where we see eye to eye is the fact that women-only spaces should be women-only spaces. But we look at this from a social point of view. Women, actually, like these TERFs, actually look at it, I would say, predominantly from a man-hating point of view. I do not believe for a second that they really care about women's safety. When you look at women's prisons, for example, they have the highest rate of sexual violence, but the fact that it's almost exclusively female on female sexual violence, the feminists don't care about that at all. They exclusively care about the fact that there are now transgender women being abusive to women, which you and I, we both agree that that needs to stop. But other issues of violence against women are never addressed by these people. So my talk will be about the fact that just because the TERFs are the enemies of our enemies does not and should not make them our friends. We have to draw a line and have to say, sorry, this is a monster that you created because the trans ideology came directly out of feminism, because they tried to destabilize gender roles. This is your monster. You deal with your own monster. There is no place for you in the conservative movement unless you actually become fully conservative, and that includes being against abortion, being pro-family, being pro-gender norms. If you're not on board with that, please fight for yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, in Scotland, you got people like Murdo Fraser, who I think is probably in his heart of hearts quite socially conservative, but he will go into battle behind the gender critical feminists, because you're obviously safe if you're hiding behind a feminist. So he will go in under their banner and approach the issue under their banner. But you're absolutely right. Their philosophy is way, way off, which you often don't hear, because the media reporting is all about the practicalities. I made a video on this a while ago about what they were saying in the parliament. And a big part of it was that the women were saying, we're not having men saying they're women because women have been oppressed. And if you haven't been oppressed all your life, we're not having you suddenly say, I'm a woman, because you've got to have a lifetime of oppression to earn the label woman. So you can forget that. You're not oppressed just because you say you're a woman. You're not joining our oppressed club just by, filling a form in. We're not having that. I was like, wow. Like you say, that's just coming from a completely different place.
Absolutely,
than where I come to the issue from.
Can I ask you something? Because that is a question that I asked some TERFs on Twitter recently, and the thing is, I did not get an answer. It was about the question of, in brackets, real transgender people. So people with real gender dysphoria. What that is, yes, it's a mental health issue. So I think we both agree with that. But I actually hold the position that somebody who had the full operation, everything, who took hormones, I would probably be open to having them, for example, in a female prison, and somebody who had, like a trans man who had all the operations, who now has male genitalia, in my opinion, should probably be in a male prison. Because I think it's not okay for somebody with male genitalia being in a female prison, no matter what their birth gender was. And that was a conversation that I tried to start with TERFs, and they said, absolutely no male should be allowed in a female prison. And then I said, so should a trans man, a biological woman who takes testosterone, who has a massive beard, and who has male genitalia, should that person be in a female prison? That doesn't make any sense to me either. What is your position on that?
Going back to square one, I don't believe it's possible to change sex. So I think for anyone,
I agree.
In terms of my advice to anyone, I don't think it's a helpful road to go down to try and live as the opposite sex. Right. But if people have got that problem and they choose as an adult that that's what they're going to try and do, I think there should be no help available from the NHS for it. I think there shouldn't be any legal provision for it. But if that's what someone wants to do, that's ultimately up to them. You're not going to have a law about what people are allowed to wear or how much makeup they put on or whatever. So in terms of people wanting to go to the other prison, the problem with that is autogynephilia. So you've got some people, for example, a man who wants to act and dress up and pretend to be a woman because they find it sexually stimulating. So obviously that person should not be in a female prison.
100%. I completely agree. Yeah.
But I think what it illustrates with it illustrates how valuable these the traditional structures are, because they're designed to remove a lot of these potential problems. And once you start blurring the boundaries and people want to start jumping over, then that reveals why the boundaries were actually there.
I would like to react to two comments. One, and I think that was in regards to me. One says wrong reasoning.
That might have been talking about the reasoning.
You're giving credibility to the trans. I think that was in regards to me,
right.
and you're giving credibility to the trans agenda. The thing is, certain issues need to be addressed, and we have to think things through. And it's not about giving something credibility. I also think that medical treatment or like the operation is not the right approach for trans people. I think they should have mental health guidance, and they should have spiritual guidance to deal with their dysmorphia. It should not be encouraged. And I'm against the operations. We are on board with that. But if there is a person, and there are people that had all the operations and that are taking hormones, the question is, somebody like that, where should they go when they have to go to prison? I think when it comes to changing rooms, you should go into your own cubicle, but there are certain areas. To me, it just doesn't make sense if somebody with male genitalia but female birth sex, if they have to be in a female prison. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I would say basically it's the fact that something's gone wrong that means that the person, again, we can sympathize with the difficulties they faced, but they found themselves in a situation where they are inevitably a problem, where they cannot be allocated to either sex's facilities. And the way forward with that, I mean, that's a practical issue, I suppose. If someone is actually in that situation, how you deal with that practically is quite difficult. But I just think it illustrates.
I would say.
Sorry, go on.
I would say that my view is, in some ways, a very old-fashioned and very conservative view, because the old-fashioned conservative view is when you see a person naked, you can tell by their genitalia in which box they should be put. Now, of course, since we have these operations, that became a little bit more complicated. But what a lot of people don't understand, the number of people that actually have all the surgeries is very small. That is very small. And by only allowing people that have all the surgeries and take full hormones into a certain space, you would reduce the number dramatically. But at the same time, we have to reduce all these gender affirming treatments. So we cannot continuing going down this road, because if we allow, and I think that's the concern, the correct concern that a lot of people here voiced in the chat. If we say only if you had all the operations you are allowed in female spaces, we're actually pushing more people towards getting all the operations, and that's not what we want. So I'm aware of that problem.
Yeah. Right. There's one final one, Victoria. Right. Love your enemies and pray for them. That's an interesting one.
100%.
As yeah, I would entirely agree with that. I was talking to someone a little while ago, a Christian leader, and we were talking about a moral issue. And I talked about our enemies, meaning the people pushing something that's wrong. And the person said, I don't like to think of people as enemies. I thought, well, I'm not sure I quite go along with that. I think that's trying to be a bit too spiritual, and maybe it's almost proud to suggest you're on a higher level than to see other people as enemies. But if you're in some sort of struggle, some sort of battle, metaphorically, and there are people on the other side that are fighting against you for something that's evil, then to call them enemies, I just think that's straightforward language. I think to refrain from that language is just an attempt to sort of boost your own moral credentials. It's virtue signaling, I would suggest. So to describe some people as enemies, we shouldn't be overly liberal with that term, but sometimes it is accurate. So to describe people as enemies, I think is perfectly reasonable. But yeah, then how do you treat enemies? You treat them as you suggest. So,
unfortunately, I have to address the last comment, because that is it's very close to my heart, by Charles McEwan. Women prisoners are damaged people. They should not be oppressed further. Maybe there is an alternative, but let women prisoners be with women. Charles, so women already get 60% less prison time for the exact same crime that a man commits. There are strong push from the feminist agenda to decriminalize women altogether, because they say that female offenders, female criminals, are damaged people and they need help. Now, female prisoners are 5% of the prison population, and they are criminals. They committed a crime, and just like female criminals, to the same extent, male criminals are damaged. Almost all male criminals come from broken homes, have experienced childhood abuse, and had, for example, no father figure, which is the same for female prisoners. So making the differentiation between women's prisoners and male prisoners is completely out of place, I would say. All people deserve support, female prisoners and male prisoners, but all criminals deserve punishment, and in an equal way. So I would argue for longer prison sentences for women and more support for both female prisoners and for male prisoners to deal with childhood trauma, and not just childhood trauma, also trauma in past relationships, which affects both men and women. And viewing female prisoners as oppressed, well, they're still criminals. So the language that you're using is actually the language of feminists, and I'm going very much against it.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of prisons, I would think, I mean, should we have like one transgender prison in the UK? I don't know, just a thought. Anyway, one last thing. As you support the family, would you condemn Tories' austerity? I think that's, to be honest, a little bit simplistic. I think some people's approach to politics is they would like the governments to give more and more money to people in need, which I think can be very valuable. Where there's genuine need, then obviously it needs to be met. But on the other hand, there's more to running a nation than just giving money away, giving more and more money away to people in need. There's lots of other considerations as well. And at the moment, we're facing the consequences of having had governments that haven't been mindful of those other considerations, because they've given money away, given money away, given money away. And that's landed us in the situation we're in now. So I think sometimes governments do need to tighten their belts.
And by doing so, the father was actually replaced from the family home.
Mm-hmm.
So in the past, where you had less support from the government, you needed the support of the father. But since the government stepped in and replaced the father, we see more and more broken families.
Yeah. Right. That's a whole other issue we could talk about another day. But right, thank you very much.
And I definitely want to see Julian Assange released. And I am well aware that there are many people in prison that should not be in prison, but those who actually committed a crime should also face the consequences. I'm aware that the system is broken.
Just to bring it full circle, maybe it won't be too long till there's aggressive women attacking people outside abortion clinics. Well, maybe there'll be some of those will be in prison before too long. We shall see. Right. Yes. Thank you very much, Phil. Interesting and stimulating conversations as ever. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for watching. Those of you watching later on as well. Don't forget our Family Party Conference, 12th of November. Look on our social media. You can get details. It would be great to see you there. That's a good night. Bye, Phil.